In today's video, you will hear some crazy, unbelievable stories from people. If you like my content, do like and subscribe. I am creating content to try to raise funds for my dad's treatment. So if you want to support his ongoing battle, the GoFundMe link is in the description section below. Thank you so much for being here. And now, let's get started. Story 1. My weirdest true story that's most likely not paranormal. One day, I was waiting for a city bus near an intersection. It was a perfectly normal day. A normal-looking car drove past, and as it approached the traffic light, I noticed there was a murder of around 30 crows flying behind the car. They were about one car length up in the air and one length behind. The car turned left at the traffic light, and the crows turned left and followed it. It was the weirdest thing, and I couldn't get my phone out in time to take a video. It was like the crows were balloons on a 15-foot string. That's how tightly they followed the car. It drives me crazy, because I will never know what happened. Did the driver kill a crow? Was the driver a witch? What happened when the driver got out of the car, wherever they were going? Story 2. A sweet older lady in our church was a retired nurse. She had never married and had no kids. She had a heart attack, and while she was in the hospital, her niece and nephew came and took her stuff. She had a modest apartment, but she owned some very nice crystal, silver, and lovely furniture. When she came home, she had no dishes and almost no furniture left. Several years later, she passed away. Her most recent will, dated after her heart attack, left $1 each to her niece and nephew. Everything else went to the church. Her estate was $9 million. Story 3. Back when I was single and on dating apps, I matched with this guy who was super cute. He had a shirtless mirror selfie, which was usually a hard pass for me, but he seemed sweet and nerdy, so I decided to talk to him. He told me he'd worked really hard on his body, because he was heavy growing up and awkward with women. I thought, he doesn't realize he's hot. I was homesick that week and bored, so we messaged a lot and even FaceTimed. He was quirky, but interesting and kind of funny. He seemed smart. He worked for a biotech firm and was applying to PhD programs. He told me about his daughter back in Illinois. She was the result of a one-night stand with a friend, and he only found out about her when she was 5. He barely got to see her because she was being raised by the mum's friend. We wanted to meet soon, and I agreed to a late movie midweek since neither of us had much time. We'd already talked so much, I just wanted to meet in person to see if there was any chemistry. We met at the theater, had a couple of drinks, and it was fine I was attracted to him. On the second date, something felt off. I started thinking this might just turn into a friendship. We ended up at his place to watch Blade Runner, and I got uncomfortable almost immediately. His apartment had strange vibes, super disorganized, with an old beach towel hung up as decoration. Seriously, We sat down to watch the movie, but I kept feeling uneasy. He leaned in to kiss me. I kissed back for a second, but then told him I wasn't ready for that, and asked if we could slow down. He said that was fine and stopped the movie, which made me look at him like. Then he dropped a bombshell. He told me he was in love with me, had dumped his long time back in Illinois to be with me, and wanted us to move in together, ASAP, and try to have a baby. I thought he was joking at first, but quickly realized he wasn't. He asked me to say out loud that I was his girlfriend, which I did, because all the true crime shows I've watched made me fear for my life. If he knew I was scared, who knows how he'd react. Then he asked if I was ovulating, because it turned him on. I faked a yawn and told him I was exhausted and needed to get home since it was a work night, but I really wanted to see him tomorrow. He looked devastated, but said, "Okay, but before you go, will you do me a favor?" At that point, I thought I was about to be murdered. I asked, what is it? He replied, "Will you stand in front of the mirror with me, so I can see how beautiful we look together?" Absolutely terrified, I walked toward his room stupidly, because I was just trying to placate him. My gut said he wasn't a murderer, just insane. His room was a disaster, piles of clothes everywhere. We briefly stood in front of the mirror before I said I really had to go. I grabbed my bag, refused his offer to walk me to my car, and straight up ran to my car. When I got home, I checked my phone and saw several video texts from him, horrifying videos of him touching himself. I shudder every time I think about them. Looking back, I realize the real reason he isn't in his daughter's life is probably because the mother figured out he was disturbed. She had a very good reason to keep him in the dark. The whole experience made me nauseous. I quit dating for a while and never put myself in another situation like that again. When I got home, I checked my phone and saw several video texts from him, horrifying videos of him touching himself. I shudder every time I think about them. Looking back, I realize the real reason he isn't in his daughter's life is probably because the mother figured out he was disturbed. She had a very good reason to keep him in the dark. The whole experience made me nauseous. I quit dating for a while and never put myself in another situation like that again. Story 4. I was walking to school, and behind me, there was a priest who seemed to be walking with a kid a few years younger than me. He dropped the kid off at my school and started hacking at a toonie Canadian $2 coin that was stuck in the ice. I wasn't allowed to go inside yet, since I was a few minutes early. So I just looked at the toonie and wondered if he'd get it out. Then he looked up at me, made a joke about how I was never going to get it, and then he walked up to me, punched me in the gut, and then left. I was wearing a winter coat, so it didn't hurt that much, but it was still pretty creepy. Nobody at school believed me. Then I saw him walking by my house almost every day or so, and I live across the street from a school. So I was worried about the other kids and told my brother, who went to that school. He came over and I pointed the priest out to him. He was sitting on my lawn. He said that he was one of the priests that worked at his school. I never once saw him actually enter the building. He mostly just walked around it for hours, eating chips. Story 5. I was almost abducted. I went to a park when I was about 6, with my sister and my mum. There was a really nice man who helped me up when I didn't quite stick the landing at the end of the slide. My mum noticed him and figured he was just being polite. Well, my sister ran off to my mum for a minute, so I was alone. I looked up and saw the man watching me as he walked around the play area, behind the slides and by the pond, away from the view of the parents. I was curious, so I followed. He was crouched by the pond, out of sight, and while I remember bits and pieces of our conversation, I distinctly remember him telling me I was pretty and very mature for my age. He then asked me if I was only there with my sister when my mum emerged, absolutely terrified and in a state of panic. I had never seen her like that, and I think that's partly why it was seared into my memory. The man ran when she started yelling, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I started sobbing because my mum was yelling. She never yells. But it took me a few years to fully understand what happened and what could have happened. I did have the stranger danger talk, but at the time, I just thought the man was so nice. That's all I really remember from that day. Story 6. When I was 16, I woke up into one of those incredibly vivid dreams. One of those dreams where you wake up in your room and don't realize you're still dreaming. I sat upright in bed and glanced sideways at my door, only to see a figure standing in the doorway. The figure ominously stated, "Your dad will die when you're 22. It was then that I truly woke up, lying in bed, too nervous to turn around and look at the door. The next morning at breakfast, I recounted the dream to my family, including my dad. An uneasy silence filled the air, and then my dad reassured me, saying, "Don't worry about it. Now that you've told me, there's no way it'll happen." Tragically, he died suddenly when I was 22. Story 7. My wife and I went away for the weekend to a friend's wedding and left our dog at a kennel. It was about midnight, and we were having a great time at the reception when I suddenly started feeling really weird. I became super anxious and shaky, just generally feeling awful, something I had never experienced before or since. I decided to go to our room to lie down. While I was there, I checked my phone and noticed a missed call from the kennel. Right when I started feeling off, our dog had suffered a stroke and died. I'm probably not the type to believe in that spiritual connection stuff, but the timing was uncanny. Man, I really miss that dog. Story 8. I was stuck in Mexico because of COVID. I know it sounds like a dream, but what led up to it wasn't at all. I had to see a doctor downtown, then called an Uber for a ride to the mall to get groceries. As we started driving, the Uber driver pulled out a second cell phone and began texting. He then turned to me and said he wasn't allowed to drop me off at the store's doors. He had to drop me off in a parking lot a block away, because that was the rule, and his supervisor would be watching to make sure he didn't go to the door. That was obviously bullshit, and I figured something bad was about to happen to me. So, I told him I knew another driver and was going to ask him for help. I lied. I didn't know anyone. Instead, I texted all the Uber information I had on the driver, including his picture, and then posted it on Facebook, just in case. By then, we were getting close to the mall. I said to him, "My driver friend said what you told me is bullshit, and that you have to drive me to the door." He just looked at me with a smirk and kept driving. I added that I had also sent all his info to my friend, including his picture, and posted it on social media. That's when his face fell, and he took me right to the doors. Afterward, I reported him to Uber, but they didn't do anything. When I got back to Canada, I wrote to the Canadian consulate about my experience. They replied and let me know that because of my situation, they had amended the warnings for visiting Mexico to include a warning about potential kidnappings like the one I had just gone through. Story 9. I've tried telling people this story before, and they either think I'm joking or look at me like I'm crazy. I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and, despite not knowing how to swim, went to a friend's grandma's house to swim in their pool. It was the 90s, adults weren't paying close attention, and the inflatable alligator I was sitting on floated into the deep end. As I tried to paddle to the side, I fell in and sank straight to the bottom. I remember looking up and seeing the shimmering sunlight above me. Then, I reached up and felt a hand come down, pulling me out of the water. Once I was out, I looked around, and nobody was there. To this day, I believe I had a guardian angel or something who saved me. Story 10. I was about 16 and at the town mall. It was just about closing time, but I really had to use the restroom, so I went in. Just as I was finishing, I heard the door open and footsteps approach. I noticed 2 big red clown shoes right in front of my stall, and I immediately felt creeped out. I waited what felt like forever until the person finally backed up. When I opened the stall, I was met with a freaky clown staring at me motionless, silent, just looking at me. He resembled a creepy, fat version of Pennywise, with a fake smile printed on his face. I walked past him without even washing my hands and ran out of the restroom, straight to my car. A week later, I read a news article about how they had bolstered mall security because a guy was stabbed outside the mall by someone wearing a clown outfit. Story 11. I was playing with my friend's drone in a small field. The drone lost connection from the controller and fell down, so I ran to pick it up. As I picked it up, fog started rolling in. I didn't think much of it at first and began walking towards my friend. What set me off that something was wrong was that, after walking for about a minute, I didn't run into anything. Like I said, it was a small field. I should have encountered a picnic table, a play structure, or gone down a hill after walking for that long in any direction, but there was just nothing. I couldn't tell which way the sun was because of the fog, and it was just me, fog, and a bit of grass at my feet. It was also remarkably quiet. Feeling a bit uneasy, I started running. After about 2 minutes, I still didn't see anything new. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I spotted my friend, and he asked if I was okay. To my surprise, the fog dissipated, and he told me that I had been standing in place for the past minute. Story 12. I was young, maybe around 8 years old. My older brother and I were sitting in my room when, suddenly, the blinds closed at the time started shaking in a ripple motion from top to bottom. We froze, and I noticed a shadow of a hand in the top left corner that just happened to be where a big hole was in my window. At first, we started to laugh because we thought it was our dad playing a trick on us, so we called out to him loudly. To our surprise, we heard him answer from the other side of the house. We then called out to our mum, thinking it might be her, but she also answered from the other side of the house, with my dad. We began yelling, and soon enough, our parents came running. After we explained what happened, they opened the blinds and revealed a squirrel on the screen outside my window. It wasn't uncommon. I'm from a slightly more rural area in Alabama. They said that was all it was. Once my parents left, my brother looked at me, asking if I had seen the shadow of the hand as well. I said yes, and described it to him in detail. I had seen it extending from the top left, and it looked like it had semi-long, sharp fingernails. We couldn't figure out how a squirrel on the outside of the house could rattle the blinds inside my room. I think my parents only told us that to calm us down. Story 13. I was maybe almost kidnapped as a baby. I was only about 1.5 years old when this happened, so I obviously don't remember it. The most reliable source, my mum, refuses to talk about it, so I had to hear the details from my dad. One night, about a month after my brother was born, my mum woke up to the sound of crying. She went to check on my brother, assuming he was the one in distress, but he was still asleep. Feeling uneasy, she then went to check on me. To her horror, I wasn't in my crib. Panic set in, and she ran downstairs. I was apparently sitting up on the couch, crying. I don't think I could have gotten there myself because the crib bars were still up, and my dad says he'd never seen me pull myself up onto the couch before. The fact that neither of my parents has a history of sleepwalking has led me to believe I was almost kidnapped. Either way, it was a dangerous situation for me. If I did get there myself, what if I had fallen along the way and hurt myself? And if someone tried to snatch me, what would they have done with me? I almost don't believe this story myself, but the look of terror on my mum's face during the few times it's been brought up convinces me that the story is true. Story 14. I went to drink water in the kitchen well past midnight and had to walk past a small indoor garden. As I approached, I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I looked up and noticed something observing me from the balcony of the top room, which had been abandoned and used for storage. Initially, I thought it was just my dog that had escaped from the nearby terrace. But nope, what I saw was something with a dog-like, white, furless face staring at me from inside that room. This thing was at least 2 meters tall, covered in black fur everywhere except its face. In a panic, I quickly took a picture with my crummy phone camera and hurried back to my room. I guess that explains the times I had heard something heavy moving around during power outages. Due to the poor quality of the camera and my overwhelming fear, you can't really see much in the photo, just its nose and a bit of its mouth. But I clearly saw at least its shoulders and empty eyes. Later, while I was moving out, I had the chance to enter that room to retrieve something. The rotten wooden floor creaked ominously beneath me, barely able to support my weight. Story 15. My girlfriend, her sister, and I were celebrating her birthday in the mountains. I was the designated driver, so I stayed sober the whole time. We were having a great time when, all of a sudden, we heard a whistling coming from the forest. It happened 3 times, but it wasn't a typical whistle. It didn't sound human at all. The vibe was immediately ruined, and we quickly packed our things to head back to the car. As we walked back, we spotted the silhouette of a man on a hill, maybe 100 feet away from us. To our shock, we saw him shift from a man into a dog, and then back into a man again. All three of us were spooked and bolted back to the car. I swear, I don't know what we saw, but whatever it was, it definitely wasn't human. The creepiest part, we all saw the same thing. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do like and subscribe, and let me know below of your thoughts. If you want to help in my dad's fundraiser, I would truly appreciate it. Hope you have an absolutely amazing day. You can also check my other videos on screen.